Assembly Member Pidgeon.
To the Mayor, your police and crime plan states that you will extend support for youth workers in A&E departments disproportionately impacted by knife crime injuries. So when will youth workers be rolled out and to how many A&Es?
So we're continuing to fund the major trauma centres, which you know about, like Red Thread. What we're doing is we're extending the programme to those other key A&E departments, not the major trauma centres, in those boroughs which have high levels of knife crime. And I'm happy to write just to let you know where we've started, where we intend to go during the course of the year.
Great.
If you remember, it was originally just the major trauma centres.
Yes.
Now we realise there are other A&Es that are affected by this.
That's right, because youth work charity Red Thread focuses on that teachable moment.
Correct.
And they would like to see their work extended to places like the Homerton, Lewisham, Northwick Park, Croydon, Newham. And those A&Es see a young person presenting 4 or 5 times with knife crime injuries before they end up at the major trauma centres.
And on that, the good news is, Caroline, which is that they're helping us with this toolkit, with information and advice on how to help, particularly in the aftermath of a knife crime. So I wouldn't want you to think that their involvement is just providing the youth workers, as important as they are. They've also provided some of the expertise, which will be in the toolkit, which goes out next year as well.
Fantastic. And you've committed 620,000 in the next financial year and 800,000 in 2019-20. Are you confident that that funding will enable them to roll out their programme to each of these hospitals where it's desperately needed?
I hope so. We've given as much as we possibly can. So there's, just to remind you, we've increased from £360,000 per year to £1 million next year. We've allocated a further £2 million to develop the new children and young persons victims services from 18 to 20. You talked about the trauma work. I mean, within the police and budget we have, it's the largest amount in this area, and it's, of course, we could do more. I'm hoping that they can cover the hospitals we're talking about, because we've shown it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're just talking about prevention being better than enforcement, and this is part of that work. What representations have you made to NHS trusts or even Department of Health to match fund the money that MOPAC is providing to organisations like Red Thread? Because it's a huge cost to the whole system of young people presenting with serious injuries in A&E, as well as the cost of the community and the loss of life. I'm wondering whether you've been able to make any inway with the NHS.
So I chaired yesterday the London Health Board meeting, and just give you an idea of the crisis they're having with funding, £4 billion shortfall in NHS funding in London. Just gives you the level of the problems they're facing. We talk about the police funding crisis, they're having one as well. One of the things we talked about yesterday, which I know you'll be interested in, is whether the NHS, working with us, can provide in schools some counselling assistance. You'll be aware of the overlap between young people with mental health issues and Sean used the phrase public health in relation to youth crime as well. So there's an overlap here. And so we're hoping that we can leverage in some money from the NHS in relation to the counselling work. And you're right, it's actually, and I hate using this phrase, but it's actually a loss leader. If you invest now, you save money down the road. And so those are conversations we're having. But I'm not going to pretend it's not tough for the NHS family as well.
Yeah. But given everyone is having to make such awful savings, but this is such a cost to every silo of public sector, it's whether you think you're going to make any inroads to get joint funding.
And the good news is that the NHS clinicians we speak to in these trauma centres have nothing but good things to say about the Red Thread workers. So there is the sense of teamwork going on there. So the staff get it. We've just got to try and persuade those who are in charge of the coffers to try and release some of the money, but they are struggling with finances.
Fantastic. And then finally, Scotland was just mentioned, and I'm just wondering what action you are taking to learn from Scotland, because they have seen such a reduction in violence.
Yeah, but just a word to the wise. Of course, we talk to colleagues all around the countries, around the world. Strathclyde is a good example. We're not comparing like for like. And we've got to be a bit cautious about assuming you can transpose what works in one part of the country or part of the world to London. And that's why we've used a multifaceted approach. We deliberately took time to consult before we published the knife crime strategy. We were criticised for speaking to teachers and parents and bereaved families and youth workers and not publishing on day 2. We thought it was the right thing to do. And we've really received praise from Assembly members with, for example, the London Needs Your Life campaign. And so we'll carry on learning, but I don't think any of us should assume that by transposing what works in another part of the country, or at least Success said, it's very different.
But there may be some aspects that you can pick up through your work.
Oh, and the Commissioner, spends more time speaking to other forces around the country, including outside England and Wales, and I say it's not as a criticism of the previous Commissioner, but then previous Commissioners, and part of that is learning and to see what we can do.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you
very
very
much.
much. So